I will open the floor in a short while and take a set of questions to the panelists, but take my role in order to ask the first question to Philippe, because when I sum up what we've been hearing now, it seems pretty much to boil down, which is of course not a new consideration, that we come to this issue of humanitarian approach, and especially the ambition of the European Union to make a difference, as Gerald said, for instance, to an Australian very strict and deterrent migration policy. And on the other hand, and I mean, you are here in Greece and see the effects on the ground and how difficult it is to deal with the concrete challenges in organizing the issues at hand, in dealing with the question of a sound border protection. So speaking as a UNHCR representative, I might imagine what your answer might be, but nevertheless, in this tension between humanitarian normative wishes to deal with the situation, and then again a hands-on approach to limit nevertheless the effects, where do you see us standing?
At the same time, it's not that difficult for a UNHCR representative to respond to that, because this is the dilemma we have by the nature of our mandate, which is not only, of course, it's humanitarian nature in terms of operations, but it's also very binding, because we are the organization supposed to supervise the implementation of the Geneva Convention, which foresees obligations for states to respect certain rules. And even for those who are not part to the convention, the principle of non-refoulement has acquired the legal character of a customary rule of international law. So all states are bound by this principle of not refouling, not returning forcefully persons who would be victims, well, threatened of life, for their life or for their liberty under certain conditions. So every day, actually in every operation and in every state where we operate, we have this dilemma of having to make sure that the rule is applied, the international law is applied, and that operationally it works. And I think the response indeed for it to be sustainable and acceptable to the vast people constituting Europe today, it has to be both principled but followed with efficiency. And the very notion of asylum is an exceptional right that people have to be protected because their state, their original state, is not protecting them. And because of that situation, international law has provided there is this refugee status. But if everybody applying and coming to Europe or to other states is treated somehow in the same manner, if indeed persons who are, after a regular procedure, not returned to their countries of origin or to another country, the whole notion of asylum is at stake, and people do not believe in it anymore. So I agree with much of what has been said. That's why procedures need to be efficient. That's why it's not only a Greek problem, but it's a EU and even beyond problem. And indeed, once the procedure has been made, once we know that the risk concerning a particular individual of not being killed when he returned, not being harmed, not being put in jail for the wrong reasons, then people can be returned, and we have to actively research the possibility of returning people either to Turkey under the EU-Turkey statement, and we have said that for Syrians it is indeed possible as long as the individual examination is made and the right competent people make that examination, and return people to their countries of origin. And I think it is important that the EU member states fully explore this capacity of returning persons who have been rejected through procedures, because this is the history and this is the soul of Europe, as it has been, at least until now. If it's another Europe that we want, we also have to say it. It will have some consequences. So again, this is what, if we believe in what is asylum, make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think it's an important point. I mean, and it has been relevant, I think, especially in 2015 and 16. Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, in terms of the perfect being helping everyone arriving, and thus neglecting the fact that those who are really in need and really need help need to be distinct from the other people, which again leads to what Gerald said, the important distinction between migrants and refugees. We are not crashing the time frame for those who arrived later. We started 15 minutes later, so we take the liberty to take a little bit more time to take questions or comments, or preferably questions, from the audience, if there are any. I see the lady over there is a second one, the ambassador. So we take the set of two and go for a second round afterwards. Please keep it, identify yourself and keep it short and with a question mark in the end. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Layla Rodriguez. I'm a student from the University of Southern California. And my question is specifically for Mr. Varvitsiotis. Earlier you mentioned that anti-immigration sentiment in European countries was due to the original focus of Europe's response being humanitarian and not one of securitization. However, migration studies tend to show that securitization sparks further mistrust between civilians and migrants. So if you're to take the necessary steps to securitize, what would you do to counter the anti-immigration sentiment?
The ambassador, and then we go to the panel. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Casper Veldkamp, ambassador of the Netherlands. I have a question for Gerald Knaus. You know, I always like the interventions by Gerald Knaus. For those of you who don't know him, he's basically the architect of the EU-Turkey deal, which was adopted during the rotating presidency of the Netherlands of the EU in the first half of 2016. I agree that you need imagination and you need initiative. I wonder if the Greek authorities have enough capacity to develop the kind of proposals that you suggest. If you see how small the migration ministry is, it's already quite something that they are able to help implement the joint action plan that the Commission concluded with them. But if you look at imagination, one thing you didn't mention was adapting the UN Refugee Convention. I mentioned that because in the run-up to the elections in the Netherlands that will take place next week, a mainstream pro-European political party started to suggest that the UN Refugee Convention needs to be adapted. Now, in your view, is that taboo or not, to think along those lines? Secondly, is that practically possible? And if yes, what would you change about the UN Refugee Convention?
Thank you. One more last question could be accepted if there is any. Otherwise, we close the floor and go back to the panel, which we do. Miltiadis, the floor is yours.
Well, actually, I had already a question from you when you commented on my remarks, and you asked how we are going to deal with security, implemented security, safe borders at sea. Three things I could say. That first of all, to build up the European Coast Guard with a concrete mandate and with the adequate equipment. The second is to implement a monitoring system to spot when boats are leaving from the coast and not when they arrive in our islands, and especially for Greece this is very easy to happen. And three, to deal with the smugglers and the traffickers. There hasn't been any effort, particular effort, any coordination, any money spent the last 2 years in dealing with this issue. Well, I'm coming to your question. This is actually something that should puzzle us always. I don't think that a policy of security will ease so much the anti-immigration sentiment. Anti-immigration sentiment comes more from the economic danger that newcomers are posing to already existing jobs than vice versa. In Greece, we have received more than a million migrants coming from Eastern Europe and especially from Albania during the 90s, and we haven't seen any rise of the far right at that moment. We see the rise of the far right and the security concerns only because we are facing a tremendous economic crisis and we have a 24-25% unemployment rate. But a security policy and a security screening is needed in order not to give more and more examples and not to stop being able to produce all this false all-right news that especially outnumber in Facebook with cases of illegal migrants doing that or the other or being involved in terrorist actions that create more of a fear and don't calm this security feeling that definitely a person in the United States or in European Union should have at a greater level than other parts of the world, since we have developed and highlighted the security issue for our safe living. Thank you.
Okay, really two short answers to the questions of the Dutch ambassador. The first one, can the Greek authorities propose such an EU strategic shift in asylum and border policy? And secondly, does it require for the EU to change the Refugee Convention? On the first one, I think this has to come from the very top. I mean, this is not something the Greek migration ministry can do. It has to come from the prime minister, from the government, and I think it requires support by the opposition. I mean, if Greece and Italy want the European Union not to just continue with a policy where essentially every time there are dramatic pictures, we worry about Greece, and when the pictures disappear from Dutch or German or Swedish or Austrian newspapers, we don't worry about Greece. If Greece and Italy have a joint interest in changing this, and this is, I think, a national interest, then this is the moment to put a proposal on the table. And the major parties in Greece there is a joint national interest. I see a big danger that the European Union pushes Greece to have closed detention and then forgets about it. And then you have closed detention with no capacity to return or process or deal with people, and then you actually end up with Nauru in Chios and Lesbos and the other islands. And the EU will say, oh, now it's a Greek problem. To avoid this, I think, and to help the EU, because it's Greece and Italy that have the experience and suffer the most, this is the moment for them. And Malta is, for many years, the last Mediterranean presidency of the EU. This is why we called our proposal in December the Malta Plan. This is the moment, until the summer, for Greece and Italy to work with Malta and put on the table a functioning proposal along these lines. And I think it has to come from the Prime Minister, it has to come from the leaders of the opposition. It should be a national project. Does a credible EU policy require changing the Refugee Convention? Well, first of all, if it's supposed to be a practical policy, that's not practical, because the Refugee Convention, there are people who know New York and who know international diplomacy. I can't see this happening fast. But secondly, what would it be about? There is a simple core at the heart of the Refugee Convention, which is Article 33, which is non-refoulement, which is based on the simple recognition that just like in the law on the sea, you are obliged to rescue somebody who's drowning. When somebody reaches your territory and you are in control, you cannot send them into danger. I mean, that's the core of the Refugee Convention, and that requires all the rest, such as a procedure to assess if somebody is in danger or not. That requires us to have an asylum system, etc. So if this is not abolished, and it cannot be abolished because otherwise we have no refugee law, then the discussion about changing the Refugee Convention won't lead us anywhere. It is a diversion, and I think it's a fake debate, and we don't need it. There are ways to control our borders and reduce irregular arrivals in line with the Refugee Convention.